Transformers Devastation comes to gamers from developer PlatinumGames, who are the devs behind Bayonetta and Bayonetta 2. It's a spectacle fighter like Bayonetta, but in the Transformers universe, and specifically Generation 1, which is what a lot of us remember from the original TV series. Ultimately, it's a third-person combat game with plenty of trash critters and a bunch of the original Autobots and Decepticons that we all know and love, including, for those who are interested, the Constructicons and, of course, Devastator. Disappointingly, they're not playable. I'd love to wander around wrecking face as Devastator myself. The game came out on October 6th and is available on Steam, PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One, with a launch price of $50 USD. With a game like this, you expect the combat to be great, and frankly it is. You can choose from Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Wheeljack, Sideswipe, and Grimlock. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, they do start with somewhat different stats, but there's a full leveling and experience system so you can customize it and make any character viable. You've got a combination of basic weapon attacks, ranged attacks, and vehicle attacks, as well as a charged up ultimate. The variety is nice, and quite frankly, the difficulty is fairly reasonable. As you get further into the game, the dodge becomes absolutely essential, which slows down time briefly so that you can get in a couple of hits. I did find that some of the boss encounters don't have particularly exciting mechanics, which turns the fight into simply timing the dodge and then cycling dodge and hit. Including the basic hit weak attack 3 times and then strong attack kinds of combos, there are about 40 different combo abilities that you can use. The most disappointing piece of it all, though, is that there's no multiplayer and you can't play the Decepticons. Even if it was just in challenge modes or something along those lines, we should have been able to play both sides. If the game sells well, there's obviously the possibility that we could see an expansion or sequel from the Decepticon side. All that said, beating the hell out of Devastator feels goddamn epic. While the graphical quality of the game isn't anything revolutionary, the real beauty of it is how faithful Platinum was to the Gen 1 Transformers look and feel. They went with a 3D cel-shaded aesthetic, which granted does have a bit of a different look to the shows, but the feeling is there. Devastation runs at a crisp 60 frames per second, which of course is an essential feature of any spectacle fighter. I however did find that the overall texture quality was lacking. The effects look great, but the cityscape looks bland and boring. It's clear that the vast majority of the work graphically went into the characters with little time left dedicated to the world. I desperately wanted Devastation to have a great story and intricate areas. Unfortunately, it had neither. The rather small cityscape area is lackluster and reused multiple times throughout the game. Further areas are smaller and even less visually appealing. The scale of everything is embellished in favor of having the Transformers characters larger, which is fine, but every area lacks any significant detail and frankly, they're just boring. As for the story, I'm having a hard time deciding whether I believe they did a terrible story or whether they tried to build a story that wouldn't feel out of place with the other plots that the show ran. That's how bad it is. It belongs in a children's TV show on Saturday morning.
They're creating hurricane-force winds like they're trying to sweep the city clear.
Whatever their purpose, there is more to the situation than meets the eye.
Rather than dedicate a separate section to sound, I will say here that using the original transformation sound is awesome and of course expected, as was having Peter Cullen voicing Optimus Prime because he's been doing that in every piece of Transformers media. What wasn't expected was having Frank Welker, the original voice of both Megatron and Soundwave, coming back to reprise those roles. He does have a difficult time getting the perfect Megatron voice, but I think that's partly due to it being a difficult voice to do, quite frankly. No pun intended.
Optimus, come to save the day, I presume?
I am here to stop you from destroying the city.
Stop me? Oh, Prime, you have no idea what you're really up against, do you? Who is really...
By and large, it's a solid title with no major crashes or performance problems at all. I do think that some aspects of the design could have used a more critical look, such as area damage targeting on big boss NPCs like Devastator. Feels silly for him to take as much damage as he is while attacking his foot as attacking his head. The performance was a solid 60 frames per second necessary for a spectacle fighter, and I didn't notice any performance dips or problems along the way. The camera was a bit of an issue occasionally, though. It seems to me that in a game with so much rapid movement that the camera should not be prevented from moving through buildings. Rather, the buildings should fade, and the camera should be able to provide clear vision at all times. There were occasions where I ended up in a corner and I couldn't see any of my opponents without rushing my way back out of the corner. The best part about Transformers Devastation is that Michael Bay was not involved. It's a very faithful video game adaptation of Generation 1 Transformers with heavy nostalgia-inducing visuals and audio. The combat is solid with plenty of variety and the performance is smooth. Unfortunately, it has a silly premise and incredibly lackluster weak areas. It's also not a very long game either, and the camera will trip you up at times. These individually wouldn't be much of a mark against it, but when all you can say about a game is that the characters look good, sound good, and fight well, but the rest is crap, it's hard to recommend it to everyone. The thing about Transformers Devastation is that for grown-ass adults who watched this show when they were kids, it's a blast, but the rose-colored glasses weigh heavily on it. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10.